I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody.
Lord,
All right now.
it is my chief complaint that my heart is weak and faint. Yet, I love thee and adore. Oh, for grace to love thee more.
We had her 96 years, and yet we were still not ready for her trip to the Bountiful.
You won't know how come I lived so long.
A very good life.
We needed just one more performance. She gave it to us in the masterpiece everyone anticipated, the book, Just As I Am. She had something to say, and then she took flight.
It wasn't money that I was interested in. I was interested in making an impact on the people of the world about us as a race of people.
And as we mourn, we must celebrate the majestic, regal, dignified queen of our souls and cinema, Miss Cicely Tyson.
There were so many issues that I felt that I had to address, and I used my career as my platform.
She was legendary, excellent, dignified, devoted, and devout, intentional, inspirational, magnificent, firm, fashionable, kind, and natural.
To deal with what I consider another level of stereotypes is putting me and my race back where we were like 100 years ago.
She was our Rebecca, our Miss Jane Pittman, and our Benta, and our Coretta. She made our stories real, resolute, and resonate. She gave us confidence and courage. She breathed strength to our race and to our movement.
The first award I ever received for my acting presentation came from Push.
She won every award: Golden Globe, Tony, Emmy, Oscar, and Medal of Freedom. And now she earns the final award, Heavenly Peace. We are gratified because of the full and well-lived life of Miss Cicely Tyson. She gave us all she had. She has ascended beyond icon to that of legend. And now we behold our blessed assurance, Cicely Tyson.
I'm saying to you today, don't you sit down on the steps, 'cause you gotta. Don't you fall now. 'Cause I'm still going, honey. I'm still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stairs. God bless you.
First Saturday in February, we want to look at what are some of the legal and legislative initiatives that we want to see this administration address, and what are we working on across the country? African Americans, Native Americans, Latino Americans. What are some of the legal and legislative issues that we believe that the Congress should be addressing? What are we pushing for at various within state legislatures? So wanted to talk with you guys first. What's happening in the Native American community, and what are you looking to see happen 2021? And so today we're excited to have Chief Hoskins with us and Kim Teehee. Both have been working on this legislative legal agenda for a number of years, and we are in partnership with them at the Rainbow Push Coalition. So we are excited to bring in this new year with talking with you about your agenda for this Biden-Harris administration.
There's some substantive issues, but I want to tell you the thing that I appreciate most since President Biden's took office, which is response to the pandemic. We've been driven by science, facts, and compassion in making our decisions about how to care for our people. And the messaging out of Washington now is consistently about science, facts, and compassion. And I think a science-driven message is so important to those of us who are on the front lines of policymaking and really trying to help our people. And I don't think we can overstate how important that is, because we're really talking about saving people's lives here. And to have a consistent message about public health, how we respond to the pandemic is important. But down a little deeper into the substance, we are still responding to COVID, as I mentioned, and we're at the same time trying to make steps to recover from COVID. Now, this country is the wealthiest country in the world. We ought to be able to both respond to COVID and maintain our economic footing. And when we do that, and I think the President of the United States has a plan to do that, Indian country has to be included. And I think the good news is that every indication it will, but it has to be included because, number one, we drive a lot of the economy where we are, and tribes shouldn't be forgotten when it comes to, again, resources to respond to the pandemic and recover from, what's the worst public health crisis in living memory? That takes dollars, and we put those dollars to use better than I think anyone in the country. The most progressive and dynamic government, I think, in this country is the Cherokee Nation, and we're proving that every day. So the COVID response is important. Upholding treaty rights is key, and that's why I'm glad Kim Teehee is here, because she really embodies what it means to enforce a treaty right, because she's our delegate to the United States House of Representatives. What's our authority for that? The same treaty that removed us in the 19th century. Well, we've reached back to that treaty and told the government of the United States they ought to keep its promise. So getting Kim Teehee seated in the House of Representatives is of great substance to the Cherokee Nation, because she'll be a fighter, she'll be a champion for these issues I've mentioned and many others.
Let's pause for a minute on the treaty rights. What treaty rights are we talking about? Because most people have no idea about the treaty rights that have been negotiated with the Cherokee Nation. What are those rights that you're trying to preserve and protect?
Well, it's important for Americans to know that for Cherokee Nation and in many tribes, our relationship with the government of the United States, of course, we were here before there was the United States, is based on agreements, based on treaties. Our treaties date back to the founding of this country. And in fact, we had agreements with the British Crown before there was the United States. So those treaties, including our most recent treaty, the Treaty of 1866, lay out, for example, what our reservation is and making sure that is protected. The Supreme Court weighed in on that last summer. The provision I'm talking about with Kim Teehee said that we would have a delegate in the House of Representatives. That's a promise made. It ought to be a promise kept. You can go through the treaty and see references to natural resources, or the language they would use at the time, guarantees that we would have access to these lands in perpetuity in exchange for what was a brutal removal the dispossession of our people from our original homelands. You go back to those treaties and find those promises. And I think we're only now beginning in Indian country to really hit our stride in enforcing those promises. So we need a president who respects that. We need a Congress that respects that. The great test of that in 2021 will be whether the country keeps its promise to the Cherokee Nation to seat Kim Teehee. And I'd submit that when it does that, it'll send a signal to the rest of the country and the Indian country that all those promises ought to be kept.
The first treaty that you're most concerned about is delegate status for the Cherokee Nation in the United States House of Representatives.
That's the most important provision to enforce right now because it's attainable. It'll make a great impact on how we advocate for our people and our nation in the Congress. And I think it will be a test whether the country passes or fails it as to whether they want to keep a promise that was made, even if it was made a century ago.
What I would add as well to what Chief Hoskin just said for your audience is that our treaty, the 1835 treaty that we're talking about, was ratified by the Senate and was signed by the President of the United States and is still the supreme law of the land. That treaty right has never been found to be void. It's never been invalidated. No court has ever found it. In fact, we had a court ruling a couple of years ago that Chief referenced that upheld one of our treaties that basically said our treaties are all in effect, and something we've always known. And so we firmly believe that we will have an administration that will support this delegate position. Importantly, Congresswoman Deb Haaland, who is President Biden's nominee for Interior Secretary, supported this issue when she was in Congress. And I have every reason to believe that she would support it.
So wait a minute, as a delegate, what's the difference between being a delegate and a representative?
It's comparable to U.S. territory delegates, like in DC, for example, right? But there are distinctions too. The similarities are that my delegate position would not be a voting position like a U.S. territory delegate. But that just means final votes on the House floor during final action, right? Delegates, like U.S. territory delegates, still get to be in committees, still get to vote in committees, still get to chair committees, still get to introduce legislation, amend legislation, speak on the House floor too, but you can't vote on that final action. That's what distinguishes a delegate from a member of the House of Representatives. And in this instance, seating the delegate process-wise just requires Speaker Pelosi, who has the legal authority to seat a delegate. It would require a rule that the House would develop and that the House only would vote on. It doesn't require Senate action. The Senate acted when they ratified that treaty so many years ago.
How do you protect what you call Indian country? What does that mean in terms of the land that you've been allocated, that now we've discovered there's oil, mineral rights? What are you asking for in addition to the delegate status?
So I think Chief mentioned earlier, one thing that we've realized in this pandemic is the need to have direct access to resources, whether it's funding or PPE, those kinds of things, right? So luckily, in President Biden's $1.9 trillion package, he has proposed $20 billion to go to tribes directly, right? But we also know that the president is putting the president's budget together that he's going to submit to Congress. And our hope is that, which was in his Tribal Nations plan when he was in candidate Biden, is that it includes a request that Congress create mandatory funding for Indian Health Service. Right now, we have discretionary dollars that fund our Indian Health Service system. And in a pandemic and in the climate of government continuing resolutions and facing shutdowns, which we were last December, it created a very stressful circumstance for us when we didn't know whether or not we were going to get shut down because our dollars are discretionary, when we didn't know if we were going to get an extension of time in which to spend down our coronavirus relief funds, which we ultimately did end up getting. Just that uncertainty that the discretionary dollars creates is very disruptive to tribes that are trying to govern, especially during this kind of pandemic.
One final question. What are some of the legal struggles that you are currently engaged in to protect Indian land and protect some of the some of the businesses that you have on the reservations?
Well, the biggest legal development in all of Indian country focuses really on Oklahoma and the 5 large tribes in Oklahoma, which are really 5 of the largest in the country, including the Cherokee Nation, the largest in the country. And that is the McGirt case, which said that our reservation, dating back to those treaties we mentioned, are still intact. That creates some challenges in terms of criminal jurisdiction, perhaps extending into civil jurisdiction, but principally criminal jurisdiction. There's where we think the Congress, if they act at all, we don't want them to act in a way that they did a century ago when they really cut the legs out from under the Cherokee Nation, really undermined us, passed the Indian Removal Act. I don't think the country will pass an Indian Removal Act again, but will they do things to respond to that great victory in a way that harms the Cherokee Nation? So we've got to be watchful about what Congress does in response to what to the rest of the country isn't a relevant case. But I'm telling you, in Oklahoma, it's one of the biggest things that's ever happened in this entire history of the state of Oklahoma. Well, first and foremost, the most important principle for the whole country is the Supreme Court said that a promise made by the United States in the form of a treaty, even though the Congress could erode that or completely revoke it, the promise ought to mean something. It ought to be kept. That's the most important thing that I think people in the whole country ought to know. How it affects Oklahoma, though, is a very important thing for us here locally, and it involves criminal jurisdiction. Prior to McGirt, if you looked at a map of the Cherokee Nation, you would see a large area of land, 14 counties in northeast Oklahoma, but you'd really see a little patchwork, little almost specks at times of what people used to call Indian country, where a law called the Major Crimes Act would apply. That affects jurisdiction. If I committed a crime as an Indian on one of those little parcels of land, the state couldn't prosecute me. The United States, through the federal United States attorney, could prosecute me, or the tribe could prosecute me, depending on the facts of the case. It didn't have much practical impact because in Oklahoma, people looked at that map of the Cherokee Nation and they thought, well, that's the map of the Cherokee Nation, but the real parts that matter are these little specks of land. The Supreme Court said, forget those specks of land, it's the entire map. So overnight, the Supreme Court said that entire map of the Cherokee Nation and those other large tribes, effectively half of the state of Oklahoma, is all Indian country for the purposes of that federal jurisdiction. So suddenly the state is in a position where it cannot assert jurisdiction over things that it had historically asserted jurisdiction. I'm talking about criminal law. It raises other concerns about taxation, civil regulation, civil authority. That's important for us locally. We're concerned that the Congress might overreact, as they have historically, and beat back what was an historic win. So that's why we have to focus on it for the Cherokee Nation. But if I had to explain to any American why this matters, they don't live in Oklahoma, I would say, do you believe that a promise ought to be kept? Do you think that the United States ought to be a country that lives up to its word? The Supreme Court said it should when it comes to Indian tribes in the summer of 2020. We have to continue that momentum. And that's why we are glad to have a president of the United States do what President Biden did yesterday, which he said that the relationship between the country and the tribes is special, it's sacred. Part of the way we keep a promise is to engage in consultations and discussion. And so I think it's as much about symbolism, Reverend, as it is about substance. But that symbolism is powerful. Should the country keep its word, it should keep its word to Native Americans.
And I think I'm really happy that you took the time to share some of this information. Many people do not understand the difference between, for example, a delegate and a representative in Congress. We don't get into, in our civics education, really don't learn a lot about the territories of the United States versus the states that are a part of the United States of America, and how we relate to them from a legislative and legal status. And so I think this has been very helpful. Kim Teehee and I spoke about having an ongoing dialogue about what's happening in Indian country as we look at what's happening in various communities of color all across the United States.
I really appreciate your willingness to tell our story and to educate your audience. It allows for us to have a broader discussion, and I'm so excited that in this new administration, the Biden-Harris administration, the policy priorities of pandemic, economy, climate, and racial equity uniquely apply to all communities of color, the Native American community. And I love that Rainbow Push Coalition always includes Native Americans in the discussions that it has. So I appreciate you once again for having us, and we look forward to continued conversations.
Thank you. G.
Well, Reverend, thank you so much. You know, the democracy in this country ought to be one that doesn't leave people behind, and people who've been historically marginalized, forgotten about. We can change that through our government. That's why we need this vibrant democracy. So I'm excited to be serving at a time when these discussions are going on. And anytime we can build bridges with other people of color and help tell each other's story, I think we're better off. And so that's why I value the Rainbow Push Coalition. I wish you well, and thank you for including the Cherokee Nation in this.
How are you? This is Cameron Barnes, the National Youth Director of the Rainbow Push Coalition, and we're here with Bishop Grant, our National Field Director, to see about Tent City. Tent City here along the Dan Ryan Expressway in Roosevelt. We are trying to see what their immediate needs are and see what we can do as quick as possible to address those needs.
Say they want to give back and they want to do more and they want to be more involved. Well, here's how to be involved. This is a very well-known epidemic that we have, and we're just trying to bring light to it and kind of help move forward in fixing these problems. We know that there are many people who can help and assist with this, so now it's only up to us to actually get it started.
I just wanted to thank the Rainbow Coalition for coming through. I appreciate it. You know what I'm saying? Just for our people, just, I love that. Now, people fall back and don't even pay attention to us no more, and I'm glad y'all do. I appreciate that.
And very soon, going to deliver food and supplies and resources, not just here, but across Chicago and several other cities around the country. You want to help us, go to www.rainbowpush.org, click the donate button. Become a member today. It makes a big difference as we are rising to keep hope alive.
Since 1999, Push Excel has taken the Historically Black Colleges and Universities tour. This tour has exposed over 1,400 students from the Chicagoland area to 65 different colleges and universities and over 20 different cultural sites. This is done so that they have the opportunity to make better decisions about their college experience and choices. So this month, we are continuing on that legacy virtually. We are sponsoring and partnering with organizations that are doing like-minded things and bringing you awesome opportunities in the educational equitable space. On February 6th, you want to join Academics to Assets, and that is going to be an HBCU tour with the South Shore Legacy event. On February 13th, that very next week, join us, the ladies of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Push Excel, the Office of Career and College Services, as well as several different partnering organizations for an HBCU experience, the history, legacy, and future of historically Black colleges and universities. We invite you to the events, but we also invite you to equip yourselves with the most important information to make the college selection process that is best for you. So go to www.pushexcel.org for more information on the upcoming events and to become a student member of rainbowpush.org. It is only $15, and you want to make sure that you are staying tuned in so that you can continue to push forward.
Good morning. We are in the midst of a major drive to get more members, more people engaged and involved in Rainbow Push, supporting the programs of Push for Excellence and the Citizenship Education Fund. If you're interested in public policy and you want to help change the policies that impact those incarcerated, change the policies that impact students attending colleges and universities, if you want to be a policymaker, then you need to join Rainbow Push and join by paying your $35 right now. Some of you watch us every week. You listen to us on the radio. You're viewing us in social media. We need you to become a member. It's only $35 a year. If you believe in the scholarships that we give to thousands of students each and every year, we've awarded more than $10 million to scholars year to date. What do you have to do to give and support Push? It's really very simple. You can go to rainbowpush.org if you're on a computer and press donate. Give any amount. Every dollar is important. You want to talk to somebody, call us at 773-256-2775. You can give right now, any denomination that you choose. You can text the word PUSH, P-U-S-H, to 41444. Text on your cell phone. Most of you have a cell phone. Just text PUSH, P-U-S-H, to 41444, and you can give any amount that you feel comfortable giving. Or call us 773-256-2775, or go to rainbowpush.org and just press donate. Wherever you are, you can support us as we keep pushing for you.
The dreams of African Americans are unfolding in remarkable ways in the 21st century.
I'm tired of America coddling these people, because we have to bear the brunt of the coddling.
Voices of the movement.
In honor of Black History Month, the Rainbow Push Coalition is highlighting African Americans who have shaped their industries and pioneered paths of great diversities. These trailblazers have fought prejudice and injustice, broke through barriers and stereotypes to advance the quality of life, to raise the awareness of the issues, and to provide the leadership for the masses.
My name is Bradley Ross Jackson. In honor of Black History Month, I will be sharing information about Judge Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall was best known as the first African-American Supreme Court Justice who contributed to promoting racial equality during the Civil Rights Movement. He argued 32 cases while he was a practicing attorney before the Supreme Court, winning 29 of them. The landmark case, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka of 1954, was considered to be one of his greatest victories as a civil rights lawyer. In 1961, President Kennedy appointed Marshall to the U.S. Court of Appeals. And in 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson made him the first Black Solicitor General. According to Justice Thurgood Marshall, we cannot play ostrich. Democracy just cannot flourish amid fear. Liberty cannot bloom amid hate. Justice cannot take root amid rage. America must get to work. In the chill climate in which we live, we must go against the prevailing wind. Long live the spirit of Judge Thurgood Marshall.
When Constance Baker Motley was 15, she decided she wanted to pursue legal studies after reading a book on Abraham Lincoln, who was quoted as saying that the legal profession was the most difficult occupation. Motley earned her economics degree from New York University in 1943. She went on to earn her law degree from Columbia Law School 3 years later. Working first as a law clerk under Thurgood Marshall, Motley went on to become a leader in the fight against government-sanctioned segregation and oppression in the South. She drafted the complaint in the Brown v. Board of Education, the very complaint that Thurgood Marshall argued in that case. She secured the right of Martin Luther King Jr. to march in Albany, Georgia, She represented freedom fighters in court, successfully fought to end segregation in Memphis restaurants, and fought to eliminate the prohibition of African American admissions in institutions of higher education. She was the first African American woman to argue and win a case before the Supreme Court. Constance Baker Motley is one of those figures that ought be larger than life. She was the first Black woman elected to the bench in New York. She was a lawyer. She was a state senator. I graduated from law school in 2014. That's a full 50 years or so after she did. I also serve in the state Senate, and I'm acutely aware of the fact that this combination of me, the fact that I'm Black and I am a woman, and that I too am the first African American to serve my Senate district in the state of Illinois, makes this particular woman a lioness to me. I wanted to highlight Constance Baker Motley. The world is different and better because she was there. And these are shoulders that I pray every single day I stand on.
Please join us again next week as we highlight more great African Americans who have shaped history.
On behalf of Reverend Jackson, we thank you for joining us today as we prepare to open up African American History Month with this legal roundtable. I thought it was just significant that we would start Black History Month with some of the legal challenges and priorities that we face for 2021. One thing, all of you are able to talk about the First Amendment and what it means to us today in light of what we've witnessed most recently. And so I would like to open up with what is really free speech in light of January 6th and how social media was used to organize the demonstration, the secessionists, the riot, the attempt to take over the Capitol.
As far as what immediately stood out to me was maybe that there was a lack of regulation or something like that around the Capitol grounds. And this is something that we have to do on a local government level, say for the parish, take our courthouse. For example, we do not allow, well, first of all, citizens have to get permits in order to protest or to be on the courthouse grounds if you're not attending to business there during business hours. And we do not allow protests or activities to be permitted while the courthouse is actually in session and being used for trials. People are going back and forth to the clerk's office, tax assessor's office, things of that nature. And so I'm wondering, particularly in light of what was going to take place on that day, even if it's not an everyday thing, why there wasn't a little bit more regulation regarding how close persons could get to the Capitol or to the Capitol doors without tickets for a tour or something to show that they were supposed to be there to conduct whatever business they were going to allow to go on in addition to the vote certification. Those kind of regulations are usually upheld as being within the government's interests and the right to protect the business that is supposed to be taking place on whatever particular piece of property it is. And so that was my first observation. My first question was, how did they even get that close?
I think we are in a moment in our nation's history where we really have to reimagine or redefine or think very carefully about truth and dishonesty and lies and people that are promoting flat out statements that are not true in public space, particularly through social media or in public speech. You know, we currently have laws on the book where you cannot defame someone's character or slander someone's character. Those are usually done in an instance where you are attacking an individual or an institution. However, that has not really been tested in the space where you have public officials that tell bold-faced lies, incite and ignite people to act in a way that is disruptive to our democracy. You know, it's one thing to give your opinion. It's another thing to be dishonest. I can give you an opinion about the Super Bowl, you know, Tom Brady versus Patrick Mahomes. That's an opinion. Who's going to win that game? But if I start going out saying
that next week the Super Bowl will be played between the Chicago Bears and the Miami Dolphins. That's a bold-faced lie. It's just not true. And that should not be protected speech. And so I think those of us in the legal community really have to think about public policy and laws that make people liable for telling bold-faced lies in public space, and they cannot be allowed to hide behind the protections of the First Amendment and free speech.
You really want to regulate social media and the use of speech in social media that results in harm or deals with, inappropriately deals with our constitutional mandate. Okay, so we're going to move on to there are two big issues that everybody is thinking about. And the first one is criminal justice reform. How do we regulate police officers? We've seen the shootings live on camera. What are the legal legislative initiatives that you see need to happen? And, you know, it goes all the way back to this whole qualified immunity that police officers have in their contracts that are negotiated by the police union.
Qualified immunity is that law that protects police officers from personal liability in police brutality cases. The ABA is calling for that to be eliminated. Now, that is usually a state and local issue. And so what the ABA is calling for is that state legislatures and city councils across the country eliminate or limit very specifically qualified immunity. And so I'm very proud that the ABA did that. And that's an issue that I hope the Biden administration will champion and push to state and local governments.
I hope that the new administration in the White House builds on some of the work of the Obama administration. First, Obama, under his watch, convened a 21st century commission on policing. He also had major staff, some of whom have been brought back into the Department of Justice, to look at the jurisdictions where there have been issues with police brutality and excessive force. And they developed a host of consent decrees, many of which, or if not all of which, were abandoned under the former administration. So we need not start in the various jurisdictions where it must be addressed at baseline zero. There is a bevy of information with bright thinkers who worked on and thought about what policing should look like in the 21st century in the United States of America. We should not start from scratch. We need to pull up all of that data. We need to look at all the prior consent decrees, and we need to evaluate the extent to which they are successful or unsuccessful and move on and take the best from all of those. We need to cull from all of those the best that we can get.
I think that there are a number of things that state and local governments need to do in order to address the policing issues. This list is not exhaustive, but it is a few things at least to start. Number one, as Professor McQuarrie Smith said, rather than reinventing the wheel, I think we need to start with the standard operating procedures of police departments, and we need to go through them. We need to look at best practices. We need to pull out things that are no longer relevant and necessary, and they all should be reviewed and updated. We also need to make sure that there is better and more effective training, and the training comes from best practices, and the training can run the gamut of everything from interaction with the public to implicit biases to, again, standard safety kinds of procedures, both for the public and for the police officers, and also just basically how to communicate. And the third thing, and probably one of the most important things, is we need to figure out a way to cut through some of the existing protections that go to transparency. So for example, in New York State this past year, the governor changed, and believe it or not, it's under the civil rights law that protects the personnel records of police officers. So if you want to know how many times has Officer X been cited for inappropriate conduct or interaction with a member of the public, or how many times has an officer been alleged or have been found to have used excessive force, that information has been protected in many jurisdictions because it comes under personnel records and it's confidential. And it gets state protection. And that is something that we also need to look at, because there's a continuum here, you know, understanding what discipline is part of personnel and when it rises to a public crisis and a public's right to know.
The next area that's a hot topic is one that Ben Griffith just loves to talk about: election law, election protection. And we have a whole body of you who really want to weigh into this one because of what happened in this election and what is still happening. The lies that Attorney Thomas talked about is more than that. The actions to suppress the vote, prevent the vote, and then challenge the vote. So I'm going to open up with you, Ben, and then all of you election experts, election protection experts, I want you to just jump in.
We're dealing with residual, subtle, but highly effective voter suppression. It comes in about 20 different forms. Barbara Arnwine has written a list of 91 different types of voter suppression, and she still scratched the surface. But they come in the form of what we're going to see, hopefully remedied by H.R. 1 S1, the Voting Rights Restoration Act. That's going to be something, if passed, that will deal with all of these restrictions on early voting, all of these horribly racist actions by various governmental entities, including our own federal government, that sought to rein in and preclude African Americans from exercising their right to the franchise. We saw time and again efforts by different groups in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and it was embarrassing, but they were efforts that were fought back. There were 63 total cases, 90 different federal and state judges that said, in effect, every time that there was a claim made, they put forth no evidence, no proof, no summary judgment evidence, no competent expert testimony, nothing, and they were thrown out. And now the complaint is, we didn't have any of our cases adjudicated on the merits. Yes, they did. And the election cases were lined up. I think there were about 10 to 12 basic forms. Who is allowed to vote? What happens when your vote is suppressed? What are your remedies? And we've got to figure out how this Trump potion got swallowed by 74 million idiots. I'm sorry, but that's what we're dealing with. It's idiocy. How do you stop that? How do you rein it back? To me, from an election law standpoint, we've got a huge amount of work to do to rein in and neutralize the level of voter suppression.
I worry that in our concern for undoing the causes of January 6th, that we not promote actions that could be used against us, against people of color, in a different administration. We need to be very careful and walk a fine line. Cynthia Swan and I have been talking about this because she's very concerned. And there is an underlying rightist authoritarian element in this country that has been there for a very long time. And it concerns me deeply. I'm very concerned about the number of policemen and military people who were in that melee and attack on our democracy and their organization. And I sometimes wonder if it's time to reinstate the draft.
I think voter education is something that's really important. As we look around this country, you know, a lot of people don't realize that elections are administered on the state and local level. And so what we have to do is we have to, in a manner, assure that there's adequate funding to fund our elections. Because if you look at some of the bases for voter suppression, you know, I'm very fortunate to live in Fairfax County, Virginia, I don't have to wait in line that long to vote because my jurisdiction has the adequate resources to have a big enough polling place and to have the machinery. Other jurisdictions are not so fortunate. So I think that's a base cause that would at least level the playing field for people, and that's something that we need to focus on. The other thing that we need to realize is, elections are at the bedrock of our democracy, and we need to look at what the perception looks like when our elections do not look like they are running the right way. And so that's also something that's very important to look at. Also, Ben mentioned that we do need Shelby v. Holder. Shelby v. Holder did not undo the Voting Rights Act. What it did was it threw out the formula for pre-clearance coverage. And Ben is right. We need to work on getting that through Congress again. And what we need to realize, though, is we also need to have both sides of the aisle look at that and come together so that can become a new coverage so we can have the voting rights operate as it should.
The fact of the matter is the effectiveness or the lack thereof of our educational system really undergirds all the issues that we're talking about today. It undergirds people's understanding of their rights from the First Amendment, as well as their responsibilities to effectuate those rights in a way that does not damage our democracy. It undergirds how people enter into the criminal justice system. There's a clear connection between the achievement gap as well as school to prison pipeline, which creates some additional outcomes with their interactions with the justice system. And so one of the things that has gone completely underfunded for way too long is public education. We talk a lot about school choice. We talk a lot about lots of things that impact education, like safety, because we have lots of issues with guns in schools, but we really need to get back to talking about how do we fully fund education. And one thing that I know the Biden administration is working on is passing legislation to help schools re-engage with students because of the coronavirus pandemic. There are 3 bills that are currently on the floor: the Learning Recovery Act, the Save Education Jobs Act, and the Reopen and Rebuild the American Schools Act, that are all designed to help support from a fiscal perspective public education. And when we think about the achievement gap, we can tell, or there's research to establish whether a child can read on the 3rd grade. In the 3rd grade will really predict how many prisons we're building, will predict graduation rates and things of that nature. So I really think we need to think about funding education as a whole, but also funding pre-K programs for public education. Those are wildly underfunded. And if the few places where they are funded, it's through Title I funds, and it doesn't cover all the students that might have a need. The last thing I want to talk about in relation to education is technology and the digital divide. What we learned as a result of being forced to deliver instructions virtually is that there's a significant divide between people not only who have access to digital devices, but also that have access to internet connectivity as a whole. And another legislative priority that could assist in that is the modification or the expansion of the federal E-rate program. The E-rate program allows for school districts and libraries to receive discount rates for internet services. However, it does not expand enough to cover the creation and development of infrastructure where that doesn't exist. So if you think about rural education, there are tons of people, not only in urban school districts, but also in rural school districts that don't have towers to connect to the internet, that don't have the capacity to actually receive that internet connectivity and to access technology. So the digital divide is something that's going to continue to widen the achievement gap and continue to result in less than favorable educational outcomes for students.
We're going to have a different session for each one of these topics because it's so much information. The other thing we were going to talk about local government issues and legal priorities, because all politics is local. And we have not focused, I think, enough on state and local government issues. And if you look at what happened in the South, it was at the state legislative levels that all of these election issues occur. If you look at all the policing cases, the police laws are local. They're state laws that protect and provide for the appropriate or inappropriate discipline and sanctioning of police officers. The educational things, we don't have a constitutional right to a high quality public education for every child. So it's all state and local. So that's why this state and local government session is so important. I know we wanted to talk a little bit about, before we close, about mortgages and renters in this season of the pandemic. But when you have these economic challenges as well as health challenges, what happens to people who have mortgages, who've lost their jobs? What are some of the legal issues or concerns? How can we help those people?
Pretty much every state got several $1 million pushed out in rental assistance money this week. Several of your largest counties will have that money available and will be making those funds available to renters. There are going to be certain income requirements. There are going to be needs for them to show that maybe they're unemployed or they've lost income related to COVID, but the relief is coming. The flip side of that is it's coming from the federal government, who are notoriously bad with their regulations. So they really need to give a little bit more help than they're giving, but that's really high level. But the funds will be there to assist some of these persons.
The only other thing I'd like to talk about briefly is the Biden administration really needs to also focus on strengthening the retaliation provisions of Title VII. Those provisions have kind of been watered down over the past several years through court decisions. Every labor and employment law has some provision to prevent retaliation. We also know from EEOC data that retaliation is one of the top areas that's always kind of brought up as an area of concern. And I would hope that the Biden administration places some focus on that, because the impact results in negative civil rights implications for workers. And even though I represent a school district, and a lot of times those claims are filed against the district, it does no one any good if those protections are watered down. So I would encourage the Biden administration to also consider that as well.
We need to get moving and remind ourselves of the lesson that we learned after the 2008 election, when we thought all was well. And we sat on our laurels, and in 2010, we got a shellacking, to quote past President Barack Obama. And so I would just want to end by simply reminding us that we have to stay engaged. And when I was honored to be president of the National Bar Association, like my dear friend Beverly McCreary Smith, I talked about the need to sometimes changing the lawmaker. If you want to change the law, you may have to change who makes the law. And I think we've got to remind ourselves that our democracy is not static. It's not just a given, and we have to be engaged. And so I will close by quoting my beloved Morehouse brother, who's now a US Senator from Georgia. Raphael Warnock once said, "Our enemies are defeating us by the margins of our apathy and disengagement," because our enemies are ruthless. They don't sleep, they don't stop. And we cannot be apathetic, we cannot become disengaged.
I think as far as voting rights go, equity and education are really important. And I think what we have to look at, sort of to Juan's point, if you look at voting rights, in 1776, we the people was 6% of the population, roughly 6%, which were white males who either owned property or could pay a property tax. And if you look at then a succession of amendments that sort of enhanced the right to vote and broadened it, we also, unfortunately, voting rights seems to be an area of the law where sometimes we take 2 steps forward and then we end up a step back. I would point to, as Ben mentioned, Shelby in 2018, which eviscerated the voting rights. But then I think you just have to move forward. I take, we can't rest on our laurels and we have to keep going forward. But, if you look on January 5th, Georgia elected its Jewish senator and its first African-American senator. So I think we have to look at what we can achieve, But we can't lose sight of the fact that we have to be vigilant and we have to keep moving forward, because unfortunately, this is an area of the law where so many people started well behind other people, and we just have to keep moving the line forward. And I think we will achieve through a lot of education and vigilance for voting rights. So I encourage everyone to continue to look at that. And remember that even though unfortunately elections are a severely underfunded part of our government, it's really important. And we just have to keep thinking about, we cannot just think about it every 4 years or every 2 years. We have to be vigilant and cognizant of what is going on all the time.
One of the things that I wanted to share with you, Reverend Jackson has asked me to convene a national legal advisory committee. We have to communicate more frequently than we've had in the last several years. And you all have so much expertise in so many different areas that we need to know about. We need to just have these monthly conversations to talk about what's happening. We live in America, which means we live in these state and local government places, and we need to understand the housing issues, the mortgage issues, legally, where our pressure points should be. The issues are the same, but they're played out differently in each of these jurisdictions. And those of you who are the retired counsel, you didn't retire, you just shifted to another level. Nobody gets to retire from the movement. The movement continues.
Dr. Kim, I went to jail with a group of 7 students, July 17, 1960, almost 60 years ago. We never stopped moving. I lost a few of jail cells and death. We never stopped moving. I thought it was time to write some of it down so the older generation can learn how we did, and what we did, and how global it was. Whether speaking about Mandela in South Africa, India, Qatar, about Gandhi in India, here at home. This book tells the story, so please get it and give it to your friends. Read it, let's argue about it, let's discuss it.
Yep, so the book is Keeping Hope Alive, Sermons and Speeches of Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. It's quite a good collection. You know, we've got sermons and speeches from around the globe because you have made such a global impact, not just here in the US, but around the world.
Thank you for tuning in to our International Saturday morning broadcast. We need your support. Here are ways to give to Rainbow Push Coalition. Text PUSH, P-U-S-H, to 41444 to support the work of Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. and Rainbow Push Coalition. When you shop, Amazon gives. Visit Amazon Smile and select Push for Excellence as your charitable organization by starting your shopping at smile.amazon.com.
Get involved with the movement.
Somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody.
Join the movement.
If you're not a member, become a member.
I am somebody.
Fighting the most important battles for freedom and justice for all.
You made us change. Oh, trying to bring closer.
Join Rainbow Push.
But you're not pushing me away.
Join